Hey everyone, apologies for so many months between uploads. I have since my last episode become a third-party candidate for US Congress, vice chair of the county chapter of said third party, a member of several committees within that party, have joined 3 activist organizations, and I'm now a volunteer on 4 other progressive campaigns across my home state. On top of all of that, I am also still a full-time student at college. So yeah, needless to say, YouTube has unfortunately had to take the back seat in terms of priorities for me. However, I do tend to not abandon this channel entirely. So while it has certainly been a long wait, here is the next episode of the History of Crete series. I will try to alternate between uploading gaming-related content and the rest of this History of Crete series, as I've been sitting on the scripts for the rest of this series for quite a while now. So I'm going to get this done and then alternate between those, and that'll be the deal from here on out. No strict schedule as far as when the uploads will be going on, but yeah, at the end of the day, the main focus of this channel is still clearly going to be gaming. Just this series, like I said, I want to get out of the way. So last we left off, we had just talked about the Minoan era, and while we will get to the classical Greek and Roman eras, I wanted to skip ahead in the timeline a bit. See, originally when I planned this series, I intended to cover almost every era Crete was under the rule of a different central government, with one exception, that being the Emirate of Crete. Originally, I left this off because my first dive into researching this period yielded very little information, and this era was relatively short in comparison to the other eras. However, now that I've had more time to research, I realized that not only is this period of Crete's history too important to leave out, but it's a completely ignored yet very vital piece of information as to understanding the intersections between various faiths and communities that have had deep connections to Crete. So today will be a brief lecture on the Emirate of Crete with some small nuggets of information on the Ottoman era that, in my humble opinion, are connected in many ways that are widely overlooked by my fellow Greeks. In 818, and coinciding with Ramadan, a revolt in Cordoba erupts, which will lead to a chain of reactions that will affect the entire Mediterranean, reaching as far east as Alexandria and Crete. This revolt ultimately fails, and the entire sector from which this revolt originated is exiled, sailing across the Mediterranean for refuge and ultimately landing in Alexandria 9 long years later, where they conquered the city and intended to stay. However, this effort too in time failed, and this group of exiled refugees was forced out of the city. They then set their sights north to Crete. Unlike Alexandria, when this group led by Abu Hafs Umar al-Ikritishi, hope I got that right, landed here, they would find a much longer-term home as they would go on to rule Crete for over 130 years. Despite the new ruling class being Muslim, the majority of Cretans outside of urban centers remained Christian during their rule, and the beginning of Islamic history on Crete materially was mostly contained within or around the new emirates of Crete's capital, which was called at the time Handax, which nowadays is the largest city of Crete, Iraklio, otherwise known in English as Heraklion, or Heraklion. While for the most part, the Cretans seemed very free and still able to engage with their culture, the new ruling class, when conquering the island, made the mistake of outright destroying the previous capital of the island at Gortyn and enforcing the jizya tax on the Christians. This would lead to local resentment and give the Byzantine Empire just the political cover that they would need to ultimately commit an atrocity in return when they reconquered the island. Spoilers, but eventually in the 960s, the Byzantines reconquered the island, destroyed most evidence we have of this period's existence on the island, and committed a genocide against the entire Muslim population, who were all Cretans themselves. Every single mosque was torn down, and all Muslim Cretans were killed or sent into slavery. However, based on the little evidence that survived, it seems the Emirate of Crete was actually seeing an increase in the average person's material well-being in comparison to the Byzantine rule. If you look at a layout of the Mediterranean at the time, that actually isn't surprising. Ironically enough, while up north at this time, Scandinavians are starting to convert to Christianity, partially for trade links, way down south, Cretans were converting to Islam for the same reason. As you can see, trade links between Islamic countries with an Islamic ruling class stretch from Spain to Morocco in the west, and as far east as India. Far later, in 667, a new and much larger power invaded to yet again reshape the history of Crete with Islam when the Ottomans took control. This new era of Islam on the island would last for over 250 years and create the vibrant community known as the Cretan Turks. Unlike the previous Islamic ruling class, the Ottomans did not bring tens of thousands of refugees with them on their original landing or anything like this. This era of increasing persistence of Islam on Crete was an active choice by the Cretan people themselves. Despite occasional scrap-ups both between Christian and Muslim Cretans. They did live and prospered predominantly peacefully on the island for the first 100 years at least. However, soon larger powers, also wanting Crete for its strategic location, began to intentionally cause hatred and division within both communities. For they knew simply invading themselves would lead to resistance, but if they divide the people and motion to one half that they are, quote, on their side, they could get local support and the locals would do a lot of the work for them. Russia had long been waging a propaganda campaign to be seen as the savior of all Christians in the Ottoman Empire since as far back as 1690. And after the Russo-Turkish Wars, it was finally time to enact the, quote, Greek plan, which basically involved Russia arming a bunch of Greek Christian nationalists and promising them that if they did what you asked, they would get that so-called liberation of Greece that they were asking for. Despite Russia, by all reports, instigating the revolt on Crete in 1770, they actually lended no assistance or support after it began, and so unsurprisingly, it was a failed revolt, but it was the first of many that would further divide Cretans themselves and lead to the eventual death or exile of nearly half of the population. During the Greek War of Independence, and inspired by the military successes of Christian nationalists on the mainland, the Cretan Christian nationalists too rose up in the revolt in 1821 again. Over the next 7 years, there would be 8 Christian nationalist revolts, each with the same outcome. The large Ottoman Empire is too widespread to wield enough reinforcements to stop a revolt in the first place, but just militarily powerful enough to eventually win back the island each time. But with each revolt, Cretan Muslims are forced to barricade in the cities, while the predominantly Christian countryside continues to forcefully ethnically cleanse the island more and more each time. In addition to pure fear alone pushing others to deconvert from Islam purely for their personal safety, the population would ultimately, through all of these things, go from 45% Muslim to only a quarter in less than a century by 1881, and less than 50 years later that number would be 0%, with all either exiled or killed. Post-World War II, some Muslim migrants have come to Crete. However, nowadays they have no mosques remaining whatsoever, as all mosques on Crete are now either in ruins or have been turned into a museum against the wishes of the leadership and practitioners of said mosques. It truly is a sad state of affairs that if it were for the genocidal Orthodox nationalism, modern Crete could be so much more diverse in a plethora of ways, and actually be a symbol to other places in the area that have been beset by ethnic violence give them an example, a model of what it could look like for these communities to actually live in harmony. Like, for example, Cyprus would be very helpful to have an example for them in this alternate idea. But anyways, with all that said, this covers all I have for this video. Love you all, and take care.